Bueno, pues vamos a proseguir.
So, we are now going
Vamos
to
a
resume
seguir con nuestra primera
with
conversación
the
de
first
la
conversation this
mañana
morning
en torno a la cultura.
about
Y para ello
culture.
tenemos a un especialista
And
camusiano, ya
we've
otro
got
miembro
a
de la familia,
camusian
Franck Planeille,
expert,
con
Franck
nosotros,
Planeille, who's
a
also a member
Natalia
of our family
Menéndez,
already.
que para
Natalia
mí
Menéndez,
particularmente, pues
also who for
estoy muy
me,
contenta que haya podido estar hoy con
I must say
nosotros,
I'm extremely
y a
happy
la
that
artista
she's
Mahi
here with us,
Binebine de
and
Marruecos, que
also
también nos acompaña
Mahi
en esta
Binebine,
conversación.
an
Con
artist
ello
from Morocco
os
who's also
dejo
going to
y
participate in
doy
this
la palabra a Franck,
conversation.
y buenos días
So
a todos.
I'll give the floor to them, first of all to Franck.
Muchas gracias. Bon, voy a hablar en español.
Thank you very much.
Es mejor.
I am going to speak Spanish. I believe it's better for everyone.
Donc j'ai la tâche de relier un petit peu
My
le
task
thème,
today is
qui
to
nous est proposé
link
à l'œuvre de Camus.
the topic that was proposed
Agnès,
to
vous avez
us
vu que je me sens
in relation to the theme
vous
by
les
Albert
acceptez
Camus.
l'humilité.
But after listening to
Alors,
Agnès,
tout ce qui
I feel
dégrade
humble.
la culture
So please
raccourcit les
accept
chemins
this.
qui mènent à la servitude.
So
Donc c'est
everything that
l'intitulé
degrades
de
culture
cette phrase
shortens the paths
est
that
prononcé
lead
par Camus
to
lors d'un
servitude.
entretien
This
publié dans
sentence was
Caliban,
pronounced by
1951,
Camus during an interview
au moment où
published
il est
in the
en train
magazine Caliban in
d'achever
1951,
l'écriture de l'homme
when he
révolté.
was finishing
Mais
writing
textuellement,
The Rebel. It
dans
is,
un projet de préface
he was at the
qu'il avait
time
écrit pour,
in a
Actuel,
draft
c'est-à-dire
preface
les chroniques, 1944,
project for
1948.
the Chronicles
Alors, je voudrais souligner maintenant ce mot
1944-1948.
de chronique.
I'd like to emphasize this word,
Je vais
chronicle,
revenir plus tard.
and I'll come back to
Le
it
second
later.
point que je voudrais remarquer, c'est que
Secondly,
cette phrase
I'd like to
concerne la
highlight
presse de
that
son temps.
this sentence
C'est-à-dire
is
à l'époque,
referring
des
to the
années 50,
press of
où,
his
évidemment, il n'y a pas
time.
Internet, ni les
At the
réseaux sociaux,
time, in the
presque
50s, there
pas de
was no
télévision,
internet, no
très peu
social
de
media, almost no
presse
television,
est
and
donc
just a few
le
radio
média,
stations.
comme on dirait
The
aujourd'hui,
press
le plus
is
puissant
the
et le plus
most
influent.
powerful and influential
Cela
media.
permet d'avancer une première hypothèse de lecture.
This gives us
à
the
savoir
opportunity
que,
to put
comme nous
forward a
lisons presse,
first reading hypothesis,
nous pensons
namely that if we
Et à ce
read
moment-là,
press, we
le
think
message de Camus
media.
prend
And if
une
we do so,
surprenante et brûlante
Camus'
actualité.
message has a
Le
surprising
troisième
and
point en
burning
préambule que je voudrais proposer à notre
relevance
réflexion,
today. The third
celui
point
du
I would
mot
like to
culture.
propose for reflection
En
is
effet,
the meaning of the
une
word
interprétation un peu trop rapide
culture.
pourrait restreindre
Indeed,
le mot.
a rather hasty
culture,
interpretation could
ce sont
restrict
les
the meaning of the
manifestations de
word
l'art
culture
dans une société.
to the manifestations
c'est
of
peut-être
art
négliger
in
trop
society. But
ce
perhaps
que le mot
this
culture
would be neglecting
dit vivre
too
ensemble.
quickly what the word culture says about
Camus,
living
dans
together.
Le témoin de la liberté,
And
écrit, le témoin de la liberté,
Camus
les hommes
writes
vivent
in The Witness to
et ne
Freedom
peuvent vivre
the following
que sur l'idée
quote,
qu'ils ont
men
quelque chose
live
en
and can
commun,
only
où
live
ils
on
peuvent
the
se
idea that
retrouver.
they have something in common where
Cette
they
définition de la
can
culture,
meet each other.
au tout
This
début de
definition
l'œuvre
of
camusienne,
culture,
dénonce
at
dans
the
les
beginning
théâtres.
of Camus' work,
Ce
already in
passage où
nuptials,
Camus parle des hommes et
in
des
the
femmes
seminal
d'Algérie.
years, he writes about the
Il
men
écrit,
and women of his
Voici
country.
pourtant un peuple sans passé,
Here,
sans
however, is a
tradition,
people without past, without
cependant
tradition,
non sans
and
poésie.
nevertheless not without
mais d'une
poetry,
poésie dont je sais bien
but
la
of a
qualité
poetry
dure,
whose
charnelle,
quality I know
loin de la
well,
tendresse,
hard, carnal,
même
far
de
from
l'artiel, la seule à la
tenderness,
vérité
that
qui
of
m'émeut
the
et me
very
rassemble.
sky, the only one in truth that moves me
Le
and
contraire
brings
d'un
me
peuple
together.
civilisé, c'est un
The
peuple
opposite of a
créateur.
civilized people is a creative people. These barbarians who lounge
Sur
on
des
the
plages, j'ai
beaches.
l'espoir insensé
I
qu'en
have the
ainsi, peut-être,
insane hope
ils
that
sont en train de
perhaps
modeler
without
le
their
visage
knowledge
d'une
they are
culture
shaping the face of a culture
où la grandeur de l'homme
where the
trouvera
greatness of
enfin
man will
son vrai
finally
visage.
find its true
Alors, il faut
face.
nuancer immédiatement le mot barbare,
Let us immediately
comme le fait Camus
add a
lui-même,
nuance to the term
à la même
barbarians,
époque où
as
l'écriture
Camus
était à
himself
Alger,
did
dans la
at
présentation
the
de la
time
revue
when
Village.
he wrote to Samurai
Il
in
écrit,
Algiers.
signaler que la culture ne se sépare pas
In
d'une
the
certaine
presentation
barbarie.
of the magazine
Rien
Rivages,
ne
he
se sépare
writes,
des
"It is
étrangers,
true
voyez,
that
Clavel,
true
la
culture is
phrase
not
différente,
separated from a certain barbarism."
Humain et rien n'est
So,
étranger.
everything that's human is not strange. Nothing that is barbaric is foreign to us. The only thing is to agree on the word barbaric, that it is already a program. Let's think of barbarism.
c'est finalement dans ce
And
sens-là
in that sense, in Jamber Grenier's Islands, the barbarian is not the one that is against, but the one that is before culture,
dit-il à propos
before
de sa découverte.
civilization. For the young barbarian I was before I discovered
Cette culture du vivre
culture.
ensemble,
And
c'est
this
justement une définition que reprend la
culture,
conférence que Camus fait à la Maison
in
de
the
la
sense
Culture
of
en 1947,
living together,
sur le thème de la nouvelle culture
this is
méditerranéenne,
what Camus' conference at the Maison de la Culture in Algiers in 1937 refers to on the theme of the new Mediterranean culture, in the difference he makes between Latinity and ancient
chacun se réclame,
Greece,
et la négation même de
and
Rome,
makes him affirm that the living Mediterranean that everyone claims is the very negation of Rome and the Latin genius. The meeting of the East and West, a land of crossbreeding, this young Mediterranean appears as the reference, the paradigm,
qui, que l'on retrouve dans la pensée de
which we
Midi,
find again in La Pensée de Midi, at the end of the Rebel, of a culture that unites men from what they are
au monde,
in the relationship to the world,
au corps.
in the world of nature and of bodies. It is thus from this culture, in the sense of a living community, in which each
C'est à l'intérieur de cette
can
culture
find
que peut
themselves,
émerger
that
la
the
culture
culture that expresses
dans ses créations et ses œuvres.
that he expresses in its creations and works. And it is that it can emerge. In a certain way, it also tells us where the artist comes from and the fidelity to which he cannot deviate. A text from Nuptials at Ipasa says, "There is a time to live and a time to witness living. There is also a time to create which is less natural. It is not enough for me to live with all my body and to witness with all my heart. Live Tipasa, bear witness, and then the work of art will come." There is a freedom there. A final remark concerning this submarine Algiers allows us to better specify an idea of culture as a living link of man to the world and among men. The inflation is made by Le Minotaur, or the stopover in Iran, in a city where we find part of the tone of submarine Algiers, but which is fundamentally already different, turning its back on the sea, enclosing itself in stones and dust, ready in some way to receive the epidemic in the peace, which in the plague will devastate it. Thus, to degrade culture, as Camus writes, is first to cut its roots. That is to say, everything that makes a link with the world, with nature, and the joy of the body, and thus makes a living community. It is then that the world becomes populated with silhouettes, with figures. What then is the marker of this degradation, of the activity of ideologies at work, even in times of peace? This formulation might be a bit too limiting or not clear. In fact, as it was said this morning, we are living in an era in which ideologies are still expressed in a traditional way, in the sense of asserted doctrines claiming to be justified by philosophies. Their rhetoric, their use of lies and hatred already have a posterity that allows us to identify them without being able to fight them effectively. If that were all there was to it, it would seem that other forms of degradation of culture and consequently of man are added to this. For what is in question, then, is certainly the ideologies at work, but that which, without having an ideology, thus justifies and plans is at work in the same way. And to better identify it, we must return to Camus. Let's see what he says about the press, or the media. A society that puts up with being distracted by a dishonored press and by 1,000 cynical entertainers decorated with the name of artists runs to slavery in spite of the protest of the very people it is supposed to serve. End of the quotation. The media, the press, in this sense, the communication invading the world, are not only the visible marker of the degradation of cultures, human in the sense of living together and artistic in the sense of works of art, but are its main tool. Its weapons are, in the case of ideologies, lies and hatred. There too, where lies proliferate, tyranny is announced or perpetuated. Hatred, on the other hand, perpetuates its work of destroying all dialogue and makes an enemy of every contradiction or opponent. I found in Witness to Freedom a sentence that, if we think about our current times, will resonate very strongly. So the quote is, the 20th century, or the 21st right now, is the century of controversy and insult. It has taken the place traditionally held by a thoughtful dialogue. Thousands of voices, day and night, each pursuing a tumultuous monologue on its own, pouring out a torrent of mystifying words, attacks, defenses, exaltations, and peoples. Hatred is reinforced by the lie that feeds on it. It seems then that the system is running at full speed and even tends to go faster and faster. Indeed, man's removal from the world, from contemplation, to this first culture that creates the community, is no longer carried out against his will, but with what resembles his will, with the metaverse, augmented reality, virtual friendships and loves, the various digital addictions. The solitary individual no longer has the solitude that used to bring him back to a community. The common ground on which to find oneself is out of the world, in, so to speak, other worlds. Art itself is becoming an issue with the appearances of NFTs, these algorithms that create singular works of art, or the recent emergence of chatbots, capable of translating texts, synthesizing them, or creating them according to indications given by the user. Thus, hatred, lies, fake news, and morphine are poured out continuously. In the face of this, or rather as a complement to it, in addition to murderous ideologies, there emerges what Camus already called the madness of virtue. And we will come back to that. This demand of purity that irrigates terrorist ideologies as in same extent as consumer or speeches on this consumption and buying virtuous products, including the rewriting of certain passages in some books. The horizon seems quite crowded. How can Camus' work help us think about all this? And can the answers he provided in his time be of any help to us? This is a question that must be asked. And it is on this point that I would like to return to the term chronicle. Camus uses it as a subtitle for the various volumes of his chronicles. These chronicles are certainly those of a writer involved in the public life of his country, but it is then that the man and the artist meet. The former would be on the side of the journalist, that is to say, the one who must inform, hold up a mirror to society, relate what is happening and put it into perspective. He must then, imperatively, by the very nature of his profession, choose either the truth or lies. In The Plague, remember, Rieu's reply to Rambert, the journalist who arrives and wants to write an article on the condition of Arabs, on the status of Arabs. And the question is by Rieu, can you say everything? And Rambert says, perhaps not everything. And then Rieu says, then he won't help him out, because it's either truth or lies. And as Camus affirmed in the Alger Républicain Combat or L'Express, as a journalist, that he is the one who bears witness to the truth of the community of men. At a time when the latter is threatened, the chronicle sheds light, and carrying the truth as well as sometimes the doubt, affirms at the time that cannot be hidden or transgressed. From this point of view, it is significant to see the artist and the journalist coming together in the particular form of writing The Plague under the form of a chronicle. Some people have sometimes deplored Camus' involvement in journalism, saying that he wrote too much as a journalist. But we need to understand better this relationship. The journalist is upstream of creation and moves in the flesh of the human community. He exercises the virtues of dialogue and the search for truth at every moment. In this way, they enlighten and nourish. The journalist enlightens and nourishes the artist. In Barcelona, at the airport, I had some time and I was checking the bookshop and I found Javier Chaca's book, No Callar, it's called. Well, the translation is pretty bad, but I'm going to say it in French. Refer to this in French. He talks about citizens and artists in the foreword. And he says that the citizen and the artist, well, the artist, in fact, is questioning conventions in the work so that he can reaffirm the citizen if his proposals are valid or change them if they're not. And I found that this foreword in this book by Javier Cercas, this was a very Camusian perspective. So I come back to what I was saying. The artist, for his part, travels what Camus called the ungrateful lands of art in an essential solitude. And he writes, this singular desert in which which is only sensible to those capable of living there without ever deceiving their thirst. Camus says also a very interesting comment about his knowledge, and this is this is the same territory as that of the tyrant. Wants uniformity, and the other tries to bring dialogue to life, the harmony of differences and sometimes the opposites. So the tyrant, I'm sorry, I've lost my page. Yeah. So where the tyrant tries to create uniformity, the artist will try to create differences. The artist thus remains anchored in the flesh of unity against totality by not cutting himself off the living community and working so that it is not cut off from the world. Thus, the artist, the chronicler of the world, is today the only one who can offer a privileged image of the common sufferings and joys, and thus contribute to the regeneration of the human community. It is through art and art alone that it is possible to fight against the degradation of culture. So, referring to the living community and also the artist expression. The artist can write Caligula and we can understand him. So, the work has the possibility of revealing to us, sometimes silently, works within us to enslave us, to serve us. The artist is then a witness and a transmitter of freedom. These territories have changed, and we can be informed about the new forms of tyranny, the new territories or lands of tyranny, and this is what I was referring to when talking about the media. And what can we do at our level, at our humble level? We can undoubtedly try to crack the cracks that appear here and there in the system, the failures, to make them change. And how? Well, going back to this refusal of lies of hatred, and to try to reveal them in what is offered to us, in order to contribute to all of us. And also, we can practice that generosity which consists of knowing how to give and receive every day, in all circumstances, so that, as Camus said, and Agnès mentioned already, so that the true generosity towards the future consists of giving and receiving at the present time.
Bonjour. Merci pour cette superbe invitation.
So thank you for this wonderful invitation in this extraordinary village and island. I'm going to talk about an experience, a camusian experience, very specific. In 2013, 14 young people came out of a slum, from slums, and they went to Casablanca and they exploded themselves. 140 deaf people, many injured, and the Moroccan citizens, we were shocked. We were not used to terrorism at the time. Moroccan citizens are not violent by nature. We thought we were immunized, protected from terrorism that would happen somewhere else, really far away from Morocco, not in Casablanca, because Moroccan people are nice, you know. You're lost in the street, you ask somewhere for directions, 10 people will stop and tell you where to go, each one to a different direction, but they will all be very nice to you. So I had left for a long time. Morocco was becoming democratic. The king had died, and then I came back to Marrakesh, really nice city, my city. And then in 2013, we suffered these attacks. And I tried to understand what was going on. And I went to the slums, and I was told where it was. I went there, and what I found was, in fact, a city. 300,000 inhabitants. We didn't really, couldn't even imagine that it existed between Casablanca and Rabat. So there are walls all along the highway, and we didn't see what was behind. And I found this place. This was not Morocco, in fact. It was anywhere else, but not Morocco. It was plastic homes with holes, so they would all get wet when it rained. It was a shanty town. And then I came back twice, 3 times, 4 times. I contacted the association so I could get to know what was going on. I talked to the children there, and I decided I want to write a novel to tell the lives of these children and why they became human bombs. So I decided to tell about the story of a football team, but in the book it's an imaginary ball. It was like in the Timbuktu film. But they were very different from myself. When I was a child, my father had left, my mom was alone. I used to play in the streets, but I did find myself in these children, identified myself with them. So at the time, talking about terrorism, well, we couldn't say that these children were victims. These children are not monsters like they're shown in American films. They are not monsters. They are victims. The monster is the mafia, pseudo-religious mafia that is installed in the slums to condition the children, to influence them. The others are living without water supply, in really bad conditions, and we all participate to this terrible disaster, this terrible reality. So I started writing my book, and it was really difficult, right? I couldn't say, you know, the guy who killed your mother or your brother, he's responsible, but not so, you know, not that much responsible. And I wrote This book in Spanish is La Patera, that's the title, because it's been translated into Spanish. It had a great success, and there's also been a film based on the book. And, well, I wanted to know what was going on, to see how my story became more real. I was really excited during the filming. And during lunch, there was a buffet, and children, Dabi Laibush, who was the filmmaker, he took those children to act in the film, and they would fill their dishes up with a mountain of food. But you know, when we talked about that, it was for them like a feast. And, well, he took them to a flat for several months to train them as actors, right? And they would have a shower. And they would be clean, they watched TV, and they would play just like any other child. And then suddenly they would have to wear their old clothes on, and they had to play their role of themselves. So I asked him, what are you going to do after the film with them? I cannot adopt them. I'm not a social assistant. I'm not a social worker. So I was like, what? You've taken these children and you've taken them back to healthy conditions of living, and then you are going to send them back to the slums? Are you crazy? And then we started thinking about what to do.
We earned a lot of money, plenty of money, with that misery, out of that misery. So we started to think that it would be a good thing to somehow give back to them. So we decided to create a cultural center within this neighborhood, this deprived neighborhood. So it hosts about, it has a place for about 1,000 kids. They have a dancing room, also a language teaching room. So we decided that, well, that it would be the best thing, because that is what they were demanding. They were more than willing, eager to spend some time in that center. So it seemed that we have robbed them of their goodwill, so to say. So, of course, one day we wanted to screen a film, wanted them to watch a film, but that film was banned. It spoke about prostitution. So within the center, there were 300 representatives of deprived classes of those neighborhoods, and there were some protests. The director of the center, Sophie, called us and asked us, what can I do with those 300 rebels? Should I call the press, the police? And we told her, wait some time, because those kids, those youngsters, when they get out of school, they spend about 3-4 hours every afternoon, evening in the center, and that saved us. Also women that came to bring their children and pick them up at the end of the evening, and they faced those Islamist, radicals, because they were the cousins and the aunts of those murdered men. So they opened up a way on that rebellion. Those sitting Islamists that were complaining and revolting. So there was a sitting. So what we decided was to give money, and I always ask and request. I always ask for a contribution to it. Whenever I see a rich man or woman, I always ask him for money, because with that we opened a new center in Tangiers, and in a very deprived neighborhood, and the title of the book, that is The Star of the Street. So we've opened up, inaugurated new stars, and the last one to appear, to emerge, was in Marrakesh. So on a wonderful landscape and environment, we have 1,000 kids. Those are 1,000 dreaming children. In the past, I wrote a book called Cannibal. Or was it La Patera? Was it a small boat? I am confused. It was a book about migrants, illegal migrants. So those children that are, well, direct candidates to that clandestine or underground immigration, they want to attain paradise because they are promised Menorca, Madrid, New York. They are, well, this is the promised land for us and for Islamic, radicals. Promise more or less a different type of paradise, but more or less the same, those 70 virgins. So those children do not dream about their current reality, about Morocco. They dream about arriving elsewhere. And our work is based on enabling dreaming, dreaming of a possible world. So I'm very proud of this contribution to preventing the world from falling apart. Thank you.
Qué maravilla.
Hello, good morning. I would like to thank the organizers of this meeting, of this encounter. I'm privileged to be here. I feel absolutely privileged. I'm lucky to have the opportunity to reflect on the consequences of a cultureless world, or maybe doing it from the possibilities that culture offers the world. Everything that degrades culture seems easy to distinguish, but it's a trap. The really difficult part is to be free of degradation. We are exposed to continuous processes and manipulation techniques. Are we part of this degradation? Perhaps we should deconstruct the concept of culture with a capital C, desacralize it, desectorialize it, in order to find it again, to perceive it from a closer place, a commoner place, to turn it into a common good, to create spaces of confrontations where culture is the space, avoiding instrumentalization by different powers. Isn't that a utopia? Culture should be a place of respect, of encounter. It's part of critical sense, empathy, the essential condition of human beings. It's a need. So with it, I make myself, you make yourself. We are, each and every one of us, from human dignity, from the small, from the ordinary. Thus, culture becomes wealth, its strength. There are changeable ways of impoverishing culture. At the Naves del Español in the Matadero, Madrid, you can see Uce el Pueblo, the play by author Gabriel Calderón that I directed and that deals with the subject of fanaticism. At the beginning, when I first read it, I thought it was an absolutely necessary subject, but I didn't consider that it didn't concern me, that I was completely outside that. But as I studied it, I realized that the difficult thing is not to fall or not to have fallen at a point in time into fanaticism, because it has to do with how we apply values and beliefs and to what extent we are willing to be flexible with them and with the values from others. I believe that all of us have been or are, to a greater or lesser extent, in some form of fanaticism. Beware of absolute truths or dogmas. That is why when we think we want to fall into that trap, that we are not part of that degradation of culture, much less with servitude, we must be humble and accept that we don't have such capacity. I imagine that each of us has already fallen into servitude because we admit, because we keep silent, because we silence, because we are accomplices, because we are part of a society that at least in part is dedicated to annihilating culture, or rather we are exposed to a system that provides us with tools so that each of us is the one that gradually annihilates it and destroys it. Of course, I don't want to fall into this vision as the only one, as the only existing one. It would be painful and it wouldn't honor the truth. I feel the doubt of whether to start with a world without beauty, without the capacity for reflection, without freedom, or maybe I should start to it considering as the gift of common sense, of education, of values provided by cultures. I'm a woman of theatre and faith. I have believed for years in the healing power of culture. According to several studies carried out in several universities at the United States, it was found that the chances of happy recovery of sick people who went to theatre every now and then were up to 80%. It's surprising that this study was done at the USA, where healthcare is not public, where inequalities are encouraged, where healing is a matter of economics. Fortunately and luckily, there are voices in the world that rise up despite the weight of fierce economy. During the hardest period of the pandemic confinement, culture was essential for people not to lose their minds as a result of terror exercised from different powers, with songs, readings, plays, films, debates, operas, digital visits to the greatest museums and exhibitions, talks on issues that were happening to us, concerts, etc. There were many forms of culture, most of them free of charge, to help endure confinement and fear. We managed to connect with people, creating tribal spaces again, returning to encountering, to those encounters among people. We connected with the collective, with cultural roots. We were able to choose, and the possibilities were immense. We tried to provoke that, to bring about that connection, so that people could leave behind their own realities, and for just some moments they could change their lives. And we changed in doing so. That awareness was really helpful. I must tell you on a personal note that I became very fond of audiobooks. They allowed me to revisit or read the greatest classics. I discovered theater productions provided by various digital platforms of very important theaters. I received messages from friends not to miss this or that debate. They sent me multiple links and so on and so forth. Those moments freed me from the enormous pressure I was under and offered me oxygen. That was essential nourishment for me. From all that period, at least in Spain, we recovered libraries. People are enjoying reading again. We theater managers, we realized how thirsty people were for theater plays. Our spectators sent us message every day to find out whether we would be opening our doors again. We received messages of encouragement. When we reopened, the queues were endless. The civic behavior in the face of any disruption caused by pandemic left us speechless, and that gave us all strength, both artists and technicians. It was an encouragement that fed back to keep going despite of the many issues we faced. This sum of all the individualities who wanted to listen to words, gestures, emotions, and ideas provoked a change in society. Never have creators been so creatively. It was incredible that such a cruel and ugly moment brought about so much desire to project, to look, that search for beauty. And it wasn't only the creators in the cultural sector. Little by little, people started to get involved in creating for themselves and for others. From very different places, tools were given so that everyone could build or rebuild their own, to understand and live life with greater quality than that was being offered to them. Of course, there was the counterpart, the one that sought degradation, suspicion, illness, mistrust, subjugation, the tension provoked by fanaticism and hatred, that alertness to denounce any conduct considered dangerous or a threat, because they encouraged human destruction. They wanted us to walk towards a planet of terminally ill people, or worse still, a planet of chronically ill people. Although these ways of feeling and living in society spread like wildfire, like fear, at the same time there were those that were able to imagine the limits of what we are, what we know, to question about their meaning, to understand our existence in a different way, to dismantle violence. Many people opened up to new experiences and liberated and freed their senses. Critical thinking shouldn't go towards this dissection and discrimination. It shouldn't go divide between good and bad. Let us not break with these two ways of offering critical thinking, the analytical and the moralistic one. We should keep on imagining and desiring, because otherwise they'll destroy them. Let us follow the path of non-violence. This is how I understand culture. I'm taking up an article by Robert Koch on the degradation of culture, where he lucidly but also pessimistically states that culture, in its broadest sense, was an extra economic activity and was limited to the so-called leisure time or negation, as a negation of life. This was the first degradation of culture in modern times. Culture was transformed into a non-serious activity and a mere residual time. So capitalism completely controlled the material reproduction of society. So it began to collect segregated social activities one by one and subjugated and submitted them to its inherent commercial administrative rationality. That was the second type of degradation of culture. Culture industrialized itself. Art and mass culture, science and sport, religion and eroticism were produced more and more like cars, refrigerators, or detergents. Likewise, the production of songs and novels, of scientific discoveries and theoretical reflections, of films, paintings and symphonies, and of sport and spiritual events could take place only as a production of capital, that is, surplus value. That was the third type of degradation of culture. In any case, in periods of prosperity that followed the Second World War, there existed in many countries a kind of social buffer that partially protected culture from the absolute control of economy. That was the Keynesian redistribution mechanism, that is deficit spending, that didn't only fed military armament and the welfare state, but also certain areas of culture. Naturally, state subsidy of culture imposed restrictions on its autonomy. However, state control could be publicly debated and wasn't complete. This situation changed completely since the new global crisis and the corresponding neoliberal campaign. States haven't disarmed militarily but culturally. In a small part of the cultural spectrum, state support has been replaced by private sponsorship. Today, more than ever, these are directly subject to market mechanisms. Scientific institutes and sports clubs must be listed on the stock exchange. Universities, theaters must make a profit. And literature and philosophy must submit to the laws of mass production. Access to large distribution channels is only granted to what is useful. As a result, grotesque distortions occur in the remuneration of cultural services. Footballers earn a lot of money, but producers of reflection, of criticism, become toilet cleaners. A society that cannot reflect on itself and is composed only of paint and impertinent salesmen will be socially and economically intolerable, unacceptable. For producers of culture, art and reflective thought, there is no longer any reason to be at the service of tyrannical and paymaster capitalism. If they have any dignity left, they will have to emigrate inwardly and secretly declare at least their hostility to the laws of the market. This intention cannot be passive. It needs to be proactive. Perhaps producers of culture should be making anti-capitalist groups, cooperatives, cliques, or clubs that do not want to sell anything but to save cultural resources from the barbarism of the market. End of quote. We need to be attentive to see whether the French writer Sylvain Timsit on the 10 strategies of mass manipulation resonate with us. They have to do with how the media manipulate us, and I'm going to summarize the most relevant ones. The most common of all media control strategies is distraction. It involves shifting the public's attention to meaningless things. They either overload people with information or emphasize sporting events, celebrities, and curiosities. The goal is to make people lose sight of real problems. Sometimes the powers neglect purposely or at least fail to address certain realities. They make their citizens think that it is a problem that needs an external solution, and they pretend to present a solution. For instance, they intentionally portray that the public industry is worse than it is because they want to privatize it. Getting the public to allow things they wouldn't normally accept, introducing them gradually so that people don't even notice. For example, that is what happened with the reduction of workers' rights. Procrastination is a strategy that makes citizens think that they are taking actions that might be bad in the short term, but could be beneficial to society as a whole in the future. The end justifies the means. So that people get used to bad things, I do not reject them and think that the good will come later. Eventually, many TV broadcast messages, especially in ads, talk to us, people as if we were children. It's a form of control that tries to kill people's critical thinking skills. Keeping people ignorant is one of the main goals of those who control the media. Ignorance means not giving people the tools they need to analyze things for themselves. It means telling them the interesting parts, but never revealing the behind the scenes of what is really going on. Having ignorant citizens also means taking attention away from education. It results in a big gap between the quality of public and private education. It quenches people's thirst for knowledge and makes intelligence unimportant. Another media control strategy is to make people think that they and they alone are the ones to blame for their problems. Thus, people end up trying to adapt to their environment and then feel guilty for not succeeding perfectly. They misplace all the anger caused by the system by endlessly blaming themselves. In recent decades, science gave us access to this knowledge about biology and human psychology. Only a small amount of information reaches the public. Meanwhile, the elites have all the information and use it as they please. Once again, we see how ignorance makes it easier for powers to control society. It is through content, knowledge, and practice of the arts and reflective thinking that individuals are able to break the pattern of fascination with the commercial and cease to be dominated by consumption. French philosopher and sociologist Gilles Lipovetsky argues that culture is a tool of resistance and creativity. Culture enhances the individual's own values. It promotes reflection, reading. It enhances divergence in thinking. And without all these, citizens are no more than consumers of success and fashion puppets. I have the feeling that today's society is in constant tension between dignity and violence. If you try to achieve an ignorance, frightened, grave, fanatical, and simple society, you will be creating a violent society full of gaps, wounds, disguises. It is then that the economy most flourishes through and with violence. It embraces it. We stand face to face, alienated. We are afraid, dreading, and refusing to know, let alone appreciate each other's differences. Let us remember and recall that one of the most dangerous fanaticism is that when man believes himself to be the center of the universe. So little by little we remain vulgar, and like one of Goya's black paintings, we annihilate ourselves. But this cannot happen so easily, because on the other side of tension is the search for dignity. I have been working for many years with a non-violent aesthetics and ethics. I want an pathetic society, and my efforts are mainly focused on that. I'm part of an immense minority where culture is capital to be able to live in harmony. Right now, I'm rehearsing a play together with Teatro Azul from Armenia in Colombia about joy. It is called Alegría Station, and it has to do with looking for the limits of different types of joy, the true and the false ones, and how we can find them to improve our quality of life. We must look for drives for hope and love. Perhaps we should remember the main functions of art and, be clear that culture will not disappear. I know that not everything is good. Not everything culture is useful. We also value uselessness, as the Italian philosopher and essayist Nuccio Ordine reminds us in his book The Utility of the Useless, where he describes that in the universe of utilitarianism, a hammer is worth more than a symphony, a knife more than poetry, because it's easy to take over the effectiveness of a utensil, while it is increasingly difficult to understand what music, literature, or art are useful for. I will not be the one to bring about the tension between the useful and the useless. I try to look for different meanings of culture, its main values and benefits. That is why I'm going to, briefly touch upon different functions of culture. We have the magical religious function. It was created with primitive art, but today it is still very valuable for different ethnic groups. The aesthetic function since ancient Greece has achieved a force and marks the canons of beauty for each era, and also makes it possible different types of beauty. Going against canons is also useful to eliminate sick spaces by transforming them, inhabiting them with harmony, by restructuring them from joy magic. So the ideological function conveys the thoughts of different social, political, and religious movements, and that those can be the thoughts that can be conveyed by an author. We shouldn't understand this function exclusively as a negative manipulation or an oppressive medium that doesn't allow lucidity. It can give us tools and means to understand political situations, generate empathy, connections, paths to peace, like the Fragments Museum in Bogota. Likewise, this function can derive in that of promotion, where political propaganda is mainly based on, since ancient Rome. While the pedagogical function, with that, the artist is commissioned to illustrate messages, to teach ways of understanding life, to create methods that provide clarity, to propose new questions. But in the same way, we can fall into a form of indoctrination with those messages. So the function of recording, analyzing reality emerges. The art, if we look at the spectator, we can appreciate the modeling function of sensitivity, stimulation of the senses. Culture can serve the viewer, the reader, to refine his emotions and to improve her ideology. So we have the new function, the healing function, offering answers to blockages or unresolved situations. The inspirational function also arises to bring about creativity or action, so that we can also, and this can serve as a sensitizer of other artistic manifestations. It provides the possibility of creating a universal language through dance, music, sculpture, etc. Culture raises the level of consciousness. It can help to seek an ecological sense, to be part of the universe. The often repeated theme of sustainability can only be achieved through education and culture that is capable of proposing or defending respect and defense for difference. We must ask ourselves and reflect on our existence together with philosophy and sciences, so as to experiment different realities, to act within the coherence and consistency of belonging to this world, to be part of the world together with other living beings. We must ask ourselves, why are people afraid of culture? Maybe because in all its forms, from the artistic to the literary, it can be a powerful instrument of liberation. Culture makes us aware of the richness and importance of bringing new life. It's always an explosion of vitality. Brazilian journalist Ana Marcos reminds us that culture is music, poetry, everything that human beings are capable of expressing in the most positive way. It makes us more peaceful, more receptive to the new, more open to dialogue. Culture always brings the seeds of a latent revolution to broaden the horizons of life. It frightens the intolerant because it creates new spaces of happiness, pleasure of the spirit. The concept of culture goes beyond art and its enjoyment. It has always been associated with civilization and progress. The opposite of culture is barbarism, degradation of the best value for humanity. The etymology of this word, from Latin, evokes cultivation of the land. It creates fruits, so that it's always been associated with life, with everything that arises anew, never with death. Culture scares anyone who wants to be violent. It scares the negative side of things. In our days, there is an absence of revolutionary attitude fostered by radicalism in thinking, in politics. And in the words of the Spanish philosopher Marina Garcés, it contributes to demobilize and to increase the powerlessness against relationships in our collective environments. And the philosopher adds, there seems to be a whole cultural apparatus contributing to increasing the feeling that we cannot do anything, that we are helpless, that we can just we can't do anything but contemplate the catastrophe. There is nothing easier to control than an unhappy person. There is nothing more uncontrollable than a happy person. That is why society wants us to be unhappy. You will never be happy if you continue to search for what happiness consists of. You will never live if you are searching for the meaning of life. Albert Camus. Finally, I would like to highlight the joy, the pleasure, the enjoyment, and the benefit of culture. I end up by appealing to the common sense of each and every one of us to realize that we are jointly responsible for the fragility and strength of culture. We must act so as not to degrade it. We have the capacity, the ability to do so. So I encourage you and wish you the best of winds in this endeavor.
No sé. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
¿Qué hacemos, Sandra? ¿Hablamos?
What should we do now, Sandra? Shall we talk? We can speak French. Well, I think I said everything right. Nothing else to add. Well, I don't know. I think we've gone over everything that had to be said about this topic.
Ils vont vous réviser.
Je ne sais pas. Non, ça ne marche pas.
Le mien marche. Sinon, il y a le micro.
My mic works. Otherwise, we have the other one, yes.
Oui, alors je ne sais pas quel écrivain français disait son colocataire. Tout a déjà été dit.
Everything has been said, and now we need to go for music. That's what the French people say.
Non, ça marche pas.
Si, ça marche, non?
Oui, c'est bon, ça marche. Ah oui.
Ah,
Ah oui, d'accord.
Yeah, it's working,
Donc,
right?
oui, alors je la répète.
I will say this again then.
un
The
grand
quote.
écrivain français qui disait à son
It's a
secrétaire,
quotation
tout a déjà été dit, et
who said to
maintenant,
his
faisons
secretary, well, everything has been said, so now let's go and for the music. But I'm not going to sing. I cannot sing.
Non, moi,
Ouais.
Should I take the floor? Yes. Well, I was listening to you, right? And this brought back to my memory some text from about theatre and the difference between the public and the people, and how demanding he is concerning the theatre to have an action on the people through an action on the public. And I think there is a difference there that needs to be done. And it's a bit difficult to think about this. So we are talking to a public, to an audience that is marked by the economic restrictions, the fashions that can be have a negative perspective, but this audience is part of the living community of the people. So how do you work with that? You mentioned that too. You work with actors, the choice of the plays. What would be your first target then? The first target, it's precisely that. It's to think about the audience, the public, the audience. So I question myself, what do I want to do? Because theatre is a meeting, the meeting between the stage and over there the audience. So I cannot behave as if the audience didn't exist. So I want to make that explicit. And therefore I question myself, what do I want to do in this society? And in any case, there's always a non-violent thought or thinking that will go towards a path where we can talk about pain, about disasters, about many different topics, but we need light to be there. We can talk, it can be a tragedy or a comedy, but there must always be some kind of hope, something that will be there, something not to feel like, oh, it's finished. No, I want to have some sort of action. What do you do? What about you? I see my camusian colleagues here, well, can laugh because I've talked about vibration, capillarity, and, well, I'm not the frequent spectator of the theatre. Don't visit the theatre very often, but when we think about the theatre and about what's going from the stage towards the audience, and then the audience will go out of the theatre, what will they say when they tell about what they've seen in the plays? Should we do this like this or like that? So by capillarity, is the audience going to convey what has been transmitted to them, like sugar in tea, You don't see it, but it changes the flavor. So I wonder how this link between the audience and the people, I think this is something that refers to all artists, how a defined audience can be the greater conveyor of the message through the capillarity system. It's not a representative, let's say, but there's osmosis there. When I'm thinking about Camus and his first place in Algeria, and where we see at the end the audience, and there's, you know, everyone is engaged there. And I think there were like 2,000 people there on the benches in the beach in Algiers. So 2,000 people, and when you get out of this communion, out of this show, when they talk about what they experienced, that was exceptional, this was transferred, conveyed to the society. So this link between the audience and the people. Well, we've conducted a scientific study on the listening, of how the spectator will listen to the actor, and also the link between the actor and the role. What happens in the brain, right? And because the first step of an actor is a transformation. You're not you anymore, you're someone else. This is a transformation that takes place in the brain, apparently. And this transformation is something that is also received by the spectator. And there's also a transformation in the brain that takes place in the brain of the spectator, of the member of the audience. And this can last for 2 hours after the play. And this transformation is the catharsis, and it's not, well, it is an effect that can be observed scientifically. And I think it's very interesting. But this can also be very concerning. When I write, I am a character, and I always write with I write with the wrong person, because I write I goes, and then I realize that there's something going on wrong in my mind. Well, yeah, this might just reminded me of something, and I was in Créteil, and it was Maya Casais was going there, and I decided I want to attend, and we were really impressed. And at the end, I decided that I'd like to go and talk to her. So she was very nice. She welcomed me. She invited me to take a seat, gave me a glass of water, and Agamemnon suddenly arrived there. And he was saying, Baria, I have to hurry up, otherwise the underground will be closed. And that was terrible for me. And it was about Megnon for me. He was the actor, and he was saying, I'm going to miss the underground. And it was like a highlight there. So to which extent we receive that? I've just finished reading your book, La Patera, and it's been difficult for me. I understand, but I condemned at the same time. And I know that I will not look at some of my students as I used to, because I work in a high school, and this is where I'm talking about capillarity. I cannot work on the theory of a new look, because this gaze changes, and this is something that is the will of the artist, of the author, but it escapes us all. Well, for me, there were many problems, because I started writing, and then suddenly I could not defend terrorism. So I wrote for 2 years, and then I stopped. And I wrote a different book. It's called Stories About Marrakech. It's like holidays, literary holidays. But the book was behind me. It was pushing me. And then 2 years later, I came back to the to the original book. And then I thought, I'm going to start off from scratch. And the only way of doing that was engaging the reader. I'm going to make the reader love this child. And, you know, the reader just was forced to wish to protect the child, because I got the reader involved, and that's how I did that. Yes, and apparently what seems to be very important is the lack of understanding. I'm not saying ignorance, but the lack of understanding that is there. Because if you follow the book, when the children are taken to the mountains, and then they have the feeling that they are being embarked into something, boarded into something, but they don't understand what's going on. And because they don't understand, precisely because of that, they don't dare get out of this. And then at the end, one said no. And that was the true story. There was one guy who decided not to explode his bomb, but he didn't know how to get rid of this. Yeah. So the techniques we use, first there's the techniques used by these groups, they create this lack of understanding. Well, sometimes we convince the child that he's going to go to heaven. Yes, we convince them, but then he doesn't really understand what's going on. So the big brother is Hakim. I don't remember. I wrote everything down. And the big brother was doubting. And the child sees that the big brother starts sweating, and he never did. So there's hesitation there, and there's a moment where they don't understand. And I think that it is there where we see that art should create tools for understanding things. That's the task art has. Because sometimes we create ignorance. That's the perversion, to create ignorance. Things that we don't dare say, they don't dare say anything because they don't really understand what's going on, and they just let the others do what they want to do. I don't know. Perhaps there are questions in the audience, or perhaps someone would like to comment on some of the topics we've dealt with. Hello, thank you for your speeches, presentations. I'd like to know, in your practical work, your practices, this issue of the degradation of a culture leading to servitude. How do you deal with that as artists, as players of art? Well, until recently, in Morocco, there were 45% of illiterate people, as an average. Well, about 55% women, 45% men, I think, I don't know, something like that. And that's how we can install a dictatorship. And this is what Natalia was also talking about earlier. Culture is a factor that can lead to sedition. People can be dangerous and protest if they learn things. So we want to change things, and the way we do that is trying to educate. That's the only thing we can do. Educate. Education is key, and this is why we've created these centers. There are 5 of them. A new one is going to open. The state didn't help us at all for 10 years. They didn't give us not even a cent. We collected works, we sold them in auctioneer sales. And then 10 years later, a state institute started giving us some funds, like 30%. They're not doing their job, but they're not giving us the funds either, the means to do that. So those are the reasons. Well, in my case, I try to find plays that talk about diversity. I work with people from the Trobades. I try to... Well, non-violence is for me essential. I'm always looking for paths where I don't want to place myself in the center, but it's more like looking for dialogue, well, everything that I just explained in my presentation. I mean, it would be too long to go over everything I've done. For example, yes, so L'hiver sous la table by Roberto Paul. For me, that was very clear, a very clear act of culture, an act of culture, because it's a translator who has no money and he's renting the underneath of her table to a Polish citizen, and I try to talk about things that are happening, you know, the day before yesterday, today, and we hope this not to happen anymore tomorrow. I'd like to take the floor in relation to what was said earlier during your discussion with a quotation from Camus. He said that the artist is someone who is trying to understand if judging, confusing all judges. And that's a bit what I felt when I was listening to your presentations, and that's being in the position of an artist, when we try to escape from this judgment that is going to be sterile and assassin. Hello, my question is addressed to Natalia. I'm a bit confused because at the beginning you said that, well, that was the first thing that creates distance between people and culture is the fact that it is related to leisure. But in my personal environment and in other areas, we see that leisure is absolutely necessary in order to be able to enjoy culture. For example, when you want to listen to music live, it's usually out of the working hours, also for reading, for listening to music. If you don't have this time for silence or this time for freedom, then it would be very difficult for me to think about culture as an art. Also taking into account that for me culture is also has an anthropological branch, like cooking or preparing a bouquet of flowers, the traditions in different communities and peoples. But this distance or the analysis that you carried out saying that leisure to something different or using leisure to enjoy culture would be something that is non-benign, well, I don't really agree with that, so I'd like you to add more light to it. It's probably find the agreement in the words. So what leisure means for you, what leisure means for me, the meaning of leisure for you and for me. Also, you referred to silence, time for silence, right? And I think that kind of leisure is very interesting. That is probably a time when you can enjoy, find this enjoyment and benefit for the soul. Leisure, as I can express it, is more related to time for entertainment and for getting away from the noise, and also getting away to find time for reflection, for beauty. It's probably the opposite. So perhaps it's whether we can find the same meaning for the words like leisure or perhaps free time or spare time. And yes, the bouquet of flowers, that's wonderful, also cuisine. And for me, it's that. That's what it is about. For me, leisure or is perhaps a way of entertainment that would not allow me to listen. Let's say hear, yes, you can hear but not listen, or see but not look. That would be the difference for me. That's the way I understand the word leisure.
Hola.
Hello.
No tengo muy claro tampoco lo que quiero decir.
I'm not really sure what I want to say.
Coincido en esta.
I agree with this agreeing on what culture means, what leisure means, and whether these words should be written with a capital letter or not. Culture, for example, different spaces, also your project in Marrakech. Me too, I'm someone, you know, I'm an action person, and for me it's really important for culture to reach everyone, and in my work I'm always looking for words that can reach everyone, and there is a culture that is with capital letters and requires a lot of things to be understood, but for me culture is also education, is people, it's the people, and sometimes this escapes a bit or is excluded from these theater culture or the culture of the thought, but it's also necessary for the people. But for that we need more education, more resources. Here in the Balearic Islands there is a meeting in Mallorca, and they wanted to have a greater presence of the Balearic artists there. Well, they need more funds so that they can do more things, they can travel more, etc., and they can have a greater outreach. So when we're talking about culture and about what spectators need, the audience needs, well, I think we need to be moved. This is what will get us involved. We need the authors to talk to us directly, to have discourses that will be less serious, more fun, more close to the audience, right? It's just a comment, not a question. Just I wanted to say thank you for your presentations and some ideas about what I would like culture to be.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. This is just directed at any of you. Somebody mentioned the audience, right? And I'm wondering, to what extent has the audience's receptivity of your work altered its output?
I didn't really understand the last word. Well, I never think about the audience or the public when I'm writing, but in our countries, in Africa, we sort of have this mission of, there are so many problems that we can not look at what's going on us. You know, here you look at yourselves, whether you're doing well or not. We have a mission like Don Quixote. And in my country, there are so many problems. I don't know, I could write a story, a love story, something that will have a happy ending. I'm going to try and do this, but then whenever I start writing, at the end there are also always something that goes wrong. So that's why I don't have a lot of audience, right? A big audience. Well, we're going back to this topic of the audience, right? The public, the audience. Whether it is altered. How does the reception of your work will affect the audience? Well, in the theater, that's immediate, because there is a live relationship. When I was an actress, I felt the vibration, and perhaps that day I might be just sad, or I could be feeling bad, but I felt, for example, this desire from this wish from the audience, and that made me react. Have you felt this feeling? There's an actor who told me about this, that in a big theater you feel that the audience can be welcoming, and this is something that is conveyed. But then he told me that there are some moments when he goes on stage, he feels that the audience is aggressive, is there to just, break the play or interrupt the play, and there's some sort of rejection, and that he said it is a physical work to actually it's a sort of fight, physical fight, to be able to convey them into the play, to bring them into the play. Yes, I know, I remember at the time we felt the days when people were angry, where people were really angry, right? Well, we had, we knew that there were some days where it was difficult. On Fridays, people were very tired, like didn't react, some of them fell asleep. And on Thursday they were happier because they were about to come to the end of the week. But there was something going on in the world or in the city, I don't know. And people came with a specific interaction each day. And we needed to try and change that. And just like they have an impact on you, you try and have an impact on them, and they change you and you try to change them. So there is an interaction also in the way, like the presence on the stage, also with relation to the character, right? Well, for example, when you feel that the audience is talking a lot, right? Some people will... For example, some actors will start speaking higher, with a higher volume. But that's the wrong attitude. You should bring your voice down, and then people will keep quiet. You learn that on the stage. I've been told you need to know how to welcome them, how to say hello to them. The very last question, okay? I'd like to go back to what Franck referred to, this dysfunction between the audience and the people. Mahi said that he doesn't think about his audience, but the Gen centers have an audience themselves, these young people, these children, and the object here, or the target here, is to have this social change. And this idea of capillarity for this goal of social transformation, which is also the goal of the artist, to save many people through the works. So my question for Franck, but also for both of you. This capillarity process, how would it work? It's magical, isn't it? So to have this, for the creation or activism in terms of social transformation, how, if this can be a way of achieving this. So how can the artist have this idea of capillarity in order to achieve this goal of social transformation, social change? I will answer referring to Mahi's book, The Poet and His Shadow. Oh, the shadow of the poet's shadow, was it? One of Mahi's book. So two friends, one of them becomes a policeman, and he represents this dimension of the relationship to truth and so on. That's the topic, right? I'd like you to refer to that, in fact, to talk about this thing of capillarity there. I don't want to say more than what Alexis is going to say, but I think that here there's this idea of giving. This is key. We were discussing about this with our colleague Alexis. When we're talking about giving, but the gift in French, don, has three meanings. So the gift I receive, the gift that I give, and the fact also don, it's a gift that we can have for maths or for music or something like that. So it would be the word gift, don in French. So Camus gives us these possibilities, and there's an underlying topic in the works about the gift, about giving, about receiving, about the way giving and receiving are done, and that will increase the gift we have for giving and receiving, or the ability we have for giving and receiving. And this is a circularity, a circle here that is created, and then there is something key here. The way I will be receiving, or the way I will be giving, this fashion will be either economic, on the economic model of exchange, Marcel Mauss and his study on giving, on the gift, and when I give, the other person must say thank you. So I must, the other person must show that they're thankful, not show the lack of gratitude. So as soon as I'm giving, this is an economic relationship, an exchange relationship, and this creates a debt. All the acknowledgement and all these words of thanking, it's the gracia, gratitude, and also the debt, the economic language related to debt. So when we receive in a natural way, and when we give naturally, without asking the other person to say thank you or offering gratitude, then we are getting out of this economic relationship. And that is how it can be presented. So in so difficult context, when we bring something to a difficult district, a high school or anywhere, as long as they say thank you, it means that we haven't really completed what we had to do. When it becomes natural to go to the cinema or to go have school trips like anyone else, without saying, oh, thank you so much, this is extraordinary, then it means that that's when we're actually giving a gift. Up to that moment, it was an exchange relationship. And this is this capillarity idea here. When you're giving work, you're giving a play, the artist doesn't know who he's giving his work to, or their work to. And the ones who are receiving that work, Well, we haven't really mentioned to that in Camus' work, but at the moment he wanted to publish text under an anonymous, under anonymity, without the label. So it is not orthodoxy, it's not the Bible. So when we can live with works that can coincide with the way we think, and the best way for a writer to truly give, is to become anonymous for the person reading his works. So this giving through capillarity places this idea of the gift of giving in the center, and thinking that this is not giving anymore. It's not a gift, it's just a flow. And then this shows this capillarity can take place in that way. So when you're in a theater and there's the big feedback, when you know that 80% has been conveyed, but this is going to be diffused into the world, but no one else will know how this has been diffused, and no one will know how long this has gone, and we cannot really know, no way of knowing. And economy is there, because when we give, we receive satisfaction, so the economics are always there.
So there is always a bond, a relationship, and you sleep well with that. Economy is always present everywhere. Yeah, that's right, but you know the proverb, that sentence. Do, you know, the right thing and just forget about it. Do not demand, do not force things. So for any artist, that should be the case, and we can find that in Camus. And there is an anecdote, you know, you leave your keys on the roof of the car, you forget it, and you think if somebody steals it, well, it's in such a bad state, my car, you know, it will be useful for that. Thank you for everything you've given us, for what we've received so far. Thank you. Okay, we have about 5 minutes. 5 minutes for changing and preparing the stage for Mr. Sissako, for our last speaker of the morning, before we go for the lunch break.